Seaside town of Rothesay on the Isle of Bute is a picturesque place to live or visit. Located off the Scottish coast, it has a population of just over 4,500 people and is popular with tourists, holidaymakers, and families alike. It's frequently voted a beautiful place to visit with some extraordinary scenery, and there is a wonderful sense of community spirit. Everyone knows each other and people often leave their doors unlocked. However, the safety and security of this tight-knit community would be shattered one summer night in 2018. Alicia McPhail was born on October 22, 2011 to parents Georgina and Robert. Although her parents had separated when she was a baby, she remained their absolute priority and they both doted on her. She was bright, inquisitive, and loved being around people. She was described by her teacher as someone who loved to learn and always took great pride in her own work. Alicia was very friendly and welcomed everyone first thing in the morning at breakfast club. She was a considerate child who loved being part of a group, and she was popular with all the other children. Her mother Georgina lived in North Lanarkshire with Alicia's younger sister Courtney, and her father Robert lived on the Isle of Bute with his parents. The island is where Alicia would frequently spend time. Her parents ensured that she would see as much as she could of Robert and his parents too. She would spend every other weekend on the island, and in the summer of 2018 she made a trip over there to start her summer holidays. On the evening of July 1st at around 11 p.m., Toni McLaughlin, who was the girlfriend of Alicia's father Robert, said she checked on Alicia and saw that she was sound asleep in her bed. Knowing this, she too called it a night and headed to bed herself. As this community was small and close-knit, the key was left in the front door. While Toni was checking on Alicia, a teenage boy named Aaron Campbell was in the midst of a house party, getting drunk and celebrating the end of his exams. 16-year-old Aaron also lived on the island, having moved there at a young age from England with his parents, Jeanette and Christopher, and his younger sister. He would describe his home life as difficult. He claimed he frequently argued and fought with his mother and alleged that she drank heavily. His father was often absent due to his line of work. However, people that know the family disagree and say that both parents were very kind and loving. Before we proceed, I've got an exciting surprise for you. We've launched a brand new channel dedicated to intriguing content such as old historical mysteries, cold cases, and particularly chilling horror stories perfect for bedtime. Drop a comment letting us know if you're a fan of horror stories or not. You can find the link in the description below. Let's find out who will be the first to explore it. Alright, let's dive back into the video. Aaron Campbell on the surface was a popular and seemingly charismatic young man. He even had his own YouTube channel. He documented various things about his life, including his sporting activities. As he got older, he began dabbling with drugs and alcohol and having darker and more extreme thoughts and impulses, such as fantasizing about rape, and he even went as far to say he might kill one day for the lifetime experience. He had a history of self-harming and depression and was even entered into a rehabilitation program for starting fires. The party was being held at Campbell's house, and as it continued into the early hours of the morning, his behavior began to change. It resulted in him having an argument with his mother, telling people he felt suicidal and saying he just wanted to get stoned. Using Facebook Messenger, Campbell tried to contact Toni, attempting to buy drugs. According to the Facebook messages, there had recently been a falling out between Robert McPhail and Aaron, with Aaron alleging the quality of the cannabis wasn't good enough. Failing to get hold of Toni, he decided to head to their house, which was only a few minutes walk away. With him, he took a kitchen knife. As Alicia's grandfather Callum woke up for work at 6 a.m., he went to check on his granddaughter, but found her bed empty. He immediately alerted Robert and Toni, who subsequently contacted the police. Upon checking her phone, Toni saw the missed calls and messages from Campbell and attempted to call him back. He messaged her back saying it didn't matter anymore, with several laughing emojis. She quickly told him that Alicia had gone missing, and he replied, "Oh damn, I'm sure she's not went too far." Later that day, Aaron would send a Snapchat out to his friends with the caption, "Found the guy that done it." It's not uncommon for communities to band together when cases like these arise, and Rothesay was no exception. A huge manhunt began. Members of the public, a helicopter, and the Coast Guard joined the search, and police for more help were sent out via Facebook. Shortly after the search began, they found what they were looking for. At around 9 a.m., the police were called as a local man had discovered Alicia's lifeless and naked body in a wooded area about 15 minutes from her home. Tragically, her mother Georgina would find this out via Facebook. The autopsy concluded that Alicia had sustained 117 injuries, and the pathologist would refer to these injuries as catastrophic. On the July 21st, Alicia's funeral was held with hundreds of mourners in attendance. One of the people grieving the loss of Alicia and who was involved in the initial search for her was Jeanette Campbell, Aaron's mother. Looking for answers and anything she could do to help, she decided to check her CCTV cameras installed outside her home in the hopes of picking anything up. Upon looking at the footage, her heart dropped. She watched her own son entering and leaving the house twice around the hour as Alicia was believed to have gone missing. After asking him about this, she decided to turn the footage into the police as a way of eliminating Aaron. The police brought Aaron Campbell in for questioning as a witness, but he remained calm and collected, showing no signs of any wrongdoing. He told them he was simply heading out to buy cannabis. As part of the interview process, the police looked into Campbell's phone, which began to show the true, horrifying picture. They uncovered the Snapchat he had sent out, the Facebook messages to Tony, and evidence that he had been Googling how DNA would be uncovered at a crime scene. Following these discoveries, they would match Aaron's DNA to the DNA found on Alicia's body. The chances of it being anybody else were more than 1,000,000,000 to 1. He was swiftly arrested on suspicion of murder and charged the following day. At first, he answered no comments, but later he would claim that he and Tony had been pursuing an affair and that after having sex in the garage that evening, she had saved the condom and planted his DNA at the murder scene. After more interrogations, the horror surrounding what had really happened that night to Alicia McPhail were becoming clear. At around 2 a.m., Campbell entered the unlocked home belonging to Robert McPhail and his parents. Initially, he claimed to steal drugs. However, he found 6-year-old Alicia asleep. He would later tell a psychologist that once he saw her, all he thought about was killing her, referring to it as a moment of opportunity. He picked her up and left. Alicia began to wake up after a short time and asked him what was happening. He told her he was a friend of her father's and even gave her his t-shirt to keep her warm. The events that transpired are nothing short of horrific. Alicia was raped and brutally murdered. Campbell then threw her clothes into the sea and dumped her naked body in the woodlands before heading home to have a shower and clean off any evidence. He returned to the murder scene a short while later to retrieve his phone. When it came time for him to enter his plea, Aaron Campbell pled not guilty. The trial began in February 2019 with Judge Lord Matthews presiding. Campbell's behavior would shock the courtroom. His lack of remorse showed as he struggled not to laugh as the evidence was being presented. He would eventually say he was quite satisfied with the murder and appeared to revel in and take pride in what he had done. Following a conversation with a psychologist, Aaron Campbell would finally admit to everything shortly before his sentencing. The trial lasted 9 days and the jury took just 3 hours to find him unanimously guilty on all counts. Aaron showed no emotion as the jury fed back their verdict. Because he was under the age of 18 at the time he was found guilty, his name and images were not printed. Media outlets argued it was in the public interest to know, and as a result, for the first time in Scottish criminal history, Judge Lord Matthews agreed to reverse the naming restriction. On the 21st of March 2019, Aaron Thomas Campbell was sentenced to 27 years in prison for the abduction, rape, and murder of Alicia McPhail. This sentence would later be reduced by 3 years after Campbell made a successful appeal. Upon sentencing, Judge Lord Matthews described Campbell's arrogance and callousness as breathtaking and spoke of the profound effect the crime had on the island's community. Since his sentencing, Aaron Campbell has been disowned by his family, and police officers and detectives have warned that he bears such a threat to society he should never be released. However, should he be released at the end of his sentence, he will be just 40 years old. Almost a year after her death and a huge public donation, Alicia's memory was honored by her old primary school. They built a large wooden playhouse decorated with unicorns and butterflies. They said it was inspired by how much Alicia loved her friends and loved talking to people. They wanted to create a safe space for children to be together and make friends. The murder of Alicia McPhail was a crime that shook the United Kingdom, and her family and friends are determined that she will never be forgotten. Bethany Decker was born in Fredericksburg, Virginia. She was bright and hardworking, studying global and economic change at George Mason University, as well as working a full-time job. Whilst at university, she started a relationship with Army National Guardsman Emil Decker. She became pregnant and the pair married in 2009, welcoming a baby boy soon after. Due to his job in the military, he was often deployed to Afghanistan. And when her husband was away, Bethany was able to balance her responsibilities with the help of her in-laws, who would watch her son while she worked and went to school. The marital bliss was not to last, however, as while working as a waitress, she met an immigrant from Bolivia called Ronald Roldan, and before long, the two were pursuing an affair. Bethany and Emil's marital woes began to show. She moved out into an apartment on Orchard Grass Terrace in Ashburn, Virginia. Ronald moved in soon after, and the relationship proved toxic. Ronald was extremely controlling. He would contact her throughout the day, demanding she send pictures of where she was and who she was with. Bethany was trapped, and her family started thinking of ways to get her out. But by the end of the year, Bethany had fallen pregnant again. As she'd maintained a romantic relationship with Emil while he was on leave, the father of her child remains unclear. After returning from deployment in January of 2011, Emil and Bethany went on holiday to Hawaii. After coming back, they stayed with Emil's parents, who were unaware of the strains on their marriage. The next morning, January 29th, Emil saw Bethany before she went back to the apartment she shared with Ronald. She called him to work to confirm what shift she would be working the following week, and Ronald says he saw her that afternoon. Emil was redeployed on the 2nd of February, and Bethany did not come to the airport to say goodbye, and her absence was put down to their relationship problems. This was not rare. People could often go a few days without hearing from Bethany, as her life was a busy balancing act of parenting, school, and work. She remained active on Facebook and was still sending messages to friends. However, it was these messages that would arouse suspicion. A few of Bethany's friends contacted her mother, Kim Nelson, to explain that they had received messages from Bethany's account, but they did not believe she was the one writing and sending them. On February 19th, Kim asked her parents to visit Bethany and Ronald's apartment to see if she was okay. They noticed that her car was still in the parking lot, but it looked abandoned, dusty, with a flat tire and parked at an awkward angle. After banging on the front door and not getting a response, panic began to set in. They raised the alarm and reported her missing. Initial inquiry is gravely concerned investigators. Her bank accounts had not been touched. Her phone records showed that it had not been used since her last known whereabouts of January 29th. She had failed to turn up at work and had not been seen at her university. It quickly became apparent that there was a love triangle, so Emil and Ronald became focuses of the investigation. After contacting Emil, he returned home to speak to the police. Ronald explained to investigators that he thought she had simply returned to live with her parents. Police looked into Ronald's background further and discovered he had a string of previous convictions, including identity theft and destruction of property after smashing a woman's car window. He was not able to give consistent answers when questioned about when he had seen Bethany's car parked outside. As Ronald had moved out, they obtained a warrant to search his new address. They seized phones and a laptop, but no new evidence would come of this. During this time, Emil was granted a divorce from the missing Bethany. Ronald has only ever made one public statement on the disappearance of Bethany Decker, which he made through his attorney. "My client remains hopeful and prays daily that Bethany will come home. He has complete confidence they are working hard on the case." In the years after her disappearance, Ronald began a relationship with a woman named Vicky Willoughby. Like his relationship with Bethany Decker, it quickly became abusive and controlling. During a fight, Vicky pulled a gun on Ronald. He wrestled the weapon away from her and shot her 3 times. Vicky would miraculously survive, but would lose an eye and live with the emotional scars forever. No charges were filed against her, as it was deemed that she had acted in self-defense. He pleaded guilty to 2 felony assault charges and was sentenced to 6 to 8 years in prison. She would talk about her experiences on an episode of the hit TV show Dr. Phil, and she said in an interview with the Daily Mail, "Another girl is going to get hurt by this man. It's a terrible injustice, not just for me, but for the next girl he attacks." Once Ronald has served his sentence, proceedings will begin to deport him from the United States. There is no evidence that Bethany ever gave birth to the baby she was carrying at the time of her disappearance, and no trace of her has ever been found. If you have any information relating to the disappearance or whereabouts of Bethany Decker, please contact the relevant authorities. Number 4. The mysterious circumstances surrounding the disappearance of Marcia Brantley have captured the attention of the press and public for years. Marcia Brantley was born Marcia Ellen Rader on the 28th of February 1959. Originally from Illinois, she was an only child with a large extended family scattered all over the United States. Marcia was private and kept a small circle of friends. She was friendly and strong-willed with a take-charge, no-nonsense attitude. She loved animals and would foster dogs in need of homes. Her biggest passion, however, was writing. She formed a writing club, dreamed of publishing her own works, and kept a blog that detailed the ins and outs of her life. On the 31st of March 2000, Marcia married Donnie Brantley. In her own words, it was a day filled with joy. I was bustling around and getting ready for a wedding. Mine. Family arrived at intervals throughout the day, meals were shared, and then there was the big event itself. It was great. The happiest day of my life. These words are taken from a blog post that she wrote for their wedding anniversary in 2009. In the same year as her wedding, tragedy would strike as she would lose both her parents within weeks of each other to cancer. In the years that followed, she was active on her blog called Magpie's Nest, doing everything from film reviews to lamenting about the harsh Tennessee weather. Her blog gave an insight into her daily life with Donnie, as did her Facebook page. My wonderful husband brought me roses home at lunch just because. In the comments she wrote, he just does stuff like that. He's a keeper. But sometimes what we see online is not always a true representation of reality. According to her friend Nancy Grill, who was in the writing club with Marcia, it was obvious that their relationship had underlying problems. According to Nancy, Donnie could be antisocial and didn't appear interested in the same things as Marcia. On the 2nd of June, 2009, Marcia posted to Facebook saying, "Are all the planets out of alignment? Why is everything that can go wrong going wrong for the past month?" One person commented, "Except for the roses your hubby gave you, just because." Marcia never replied. After this, no more Facebook posts were made. No blogs were published. Nobody heard from her. However, it wasn't until July or August that her absence began to show. She was often seen out walking her foster dogs, and neighbors noted they hadn't seen her do this for a while. Growing ever more concerned, a neighbor, Phyllis Dodd, went and knocked on the Brantleys' front door. When Donnie answered, she asked where Marcia had gone, saying that she hadn't been seen recently. Donnie said that she'd left him and they were getting a divorce. Phyllis told her hairdresser, Kelly DeLude, who informed a local attorney, Jerry Hoffa, in October. He passed the information on to District Attorney General Steve Beebe, and before long, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigations was involved. By this time, it was November. Investigators had little to go on. Marcia was by all accounts a private person, and nearly 5 months had passed since she'd last been seen. Donnie maintained when talking to investigators that she had left her own accord and was intending on divorcing him. But alarm bells were beginning to ring for investigators, and they became increasingly concerned for Marcia's welfare. An initial search did nothing to quell their fears. Her car remained parked at the house, her clothes were in her wardrobe. All her possessions were where she had left them. Police could find no evidence of a woman intending to leave her spouse. Friends were also adamant that she would not have left her foster dogs behind. Investigators did not believe that she'd left by choice. They found receipts showing that Donnie had purchased items that they theorized could be used to dispose of a body, including a plastic drop cloth, a welder's kit, a tarp, and a pressure washer. During their search, an unusual email came to light. Marcia had written to the members of her writing club saying she would be, quote, missing for some time without explanation. "I'm sure we'll cross paths often since we live in such a small town." One of her closest friends, Reggie J., said it was a big shock because when she formed this group, her one criteria was that if you want to be in the group, you can't quit without a good reason. Because she wanted everyone to be committed. However, according to another friend, she had been planning on leaving the group. The friend hadn't told anyone as Marcia had said it in confidence. Authorities could not trace the origin of the email, and some questioned if it had even been sent by Marcia. Marcia also allegedly took around $110,000 that she had hidden in her home. She apparently left a note on her car saying, "Sell it, see what you can get for it." The note was not preserved as evidence by the police, and they did not believe there was any money hidden inside the home. In 2012, the home of Marcia and Donnie Brantley was searched again, this time with the assistance of cadaver dogs. Police believed that foul play had played a role in her disappearance, but no new evidence or clues turned up. 2013 brought a new twist to the case. Despite having no body and no trace of Marcia, law enforcement announced that they were indicting Donnie Brantley on charges of first-degree murder. The prosecution outlined 2 motives, infidelity and financial troubles. Donnie ran a home repair company, and after the housing market crashed of 2009, he had little in the way of business. After Marcia vanished, Donnie had her power of attorney and could have signed her name to sell his assets. However, 10th Judicial District Attorney General Steve Crump said that they could find no evidence of him using her power of attorney for financial gain. While Crump said Donnie hadn't used her power of attorney, 1 month after her last known whereabouts, her signature was used to sell the home repair business. One handwriting expert said that she had signed in her own name, but the police disagreed. They requested it be sent to a second expert for examination. This second expert determined that Marcia did not write that signature. A key piece of evidence surrounded Marcia's phone. Cell phone analysis showed that incoming calls stopped on June 2, 2009. Donnie said he had recently bought her a new phone and she had taken that one with her when she left. However, it would later emerge that Donnie had used that phone to contact a dating line, despite saying it was in Marcia's possession. They said he was, quote, looking for something different in his marriage, evidenced by the fact that he had also used online dating for several months. However, Donnie's attorney said he did not do this until after his wife had left. The prosecution also referred to a kiss he had shared with an ex-girlfriend before the disappearance of his wife, but the defense argued it never went any further. According to Marcia's friends, she would not have left over an affair, but would have been heartbroken and furious. They said that the emotional attachment she had to her house was strong. It had been built by her parents and was solely in her name. They argued she would have simply kicked him out rather than gone. Within about a week of Marcia's disappearance, both the prosecution and the defense stated that Donnie had allegedly hand-delivered a card to his ex-girlfriend with whom he had shared the kiss. It read, the prosecution argued that the timing and the contents of the card was proof that Donnie was the cause of his wife's disappearance, that he had killed her and was ready to move on. The defense rubbished those claims, saying there were no sinister undertones to the card. He merely meant he was ready to reconnect and form a friendship. They did continue to see each other for a short time after, and according to the defense, his ex-girlfriend never heard Donnie speak ill of Marcia. When talking about the receipts found during the search, the prosecution said these, along with a ticket for a landfill and Marcia's body not being found, was evidence of a premeditated, calculated murder, which in the state of Tennessee you must prove beyond a reasonable doubt to secure a conviction. The defense said the receipts were for items he would purchase as part of his home repair business. The inconsistency in Donnie's story was another key argument for the prosecution. They alleged that Donnie had changed his story several times, and the investigators said he had misled them about where their camper van was. The police said he had given different versions of events to neighbors, saying she was either living in the van or she had gone out west. The camper van was key for the prosecution, but there are conflicting reports as to where it was eventually found. One thing is certain is that Donnie had told investigators that the van was parked at a campground. However, when the police went and followed this lead, it wasn't there. The defense said this was not Donnie lying, but a miscommunication. He said that he often kept the van in a storage facility or with his parents. The police said they had found it within his parents' farm in Georgia, and when they searched it, no trace of a crime or Marcia was found. The defense argued that investigators had used bad practice and planted seeds of bias and doubt before conducting interviews. They said that before asking neighbors for their opinion of what kind of man Donnie was, they had told them he had kept changing his story. In an interview with Bradley County Sheriff's Office, this is what Nancy Grill had to say. My initial feeling was that Marcia had deliberately left and was going to go away and be that best-selling author. But the longer she was gone, and when I talked to the TBI and they told me that Donnie had told so many lies, then I began to wonder. When the police were brought in cadaver dogs in 2012, the Judicial District and the District Attorney General Steve B.B. would be hit by allegations of police misconduct and corruption. Defense lawyers said that the district had a reputation for not honoring the rights of defendants and withholding evidence. B.B. issued a defense, saying he did not know about any malpractice and he would have put a stop to it. When looking for a viable reason for Marcia's disappearance, the defense said that her severe clinical depression could not be ignored. Her medical records highlighted mood swings and that she had been injecting hormones to try and lessen the effects of the depression. Whilst the defense and prosecution argued back and forth, a shocking new twist came. 1 week before he was due to stand trial, the family of Marcia Brantley requested that the charges against Donnie be dropped. They said that if the case wasn't strong enough and he wasn't found guilty, Marcia would never see justice and they would be out of options. As they dropped the charges without prejudice, they could later be refiled if new evidence came to light. In October of 2016, Donnie was again indicted, this time on a second-degree murder charge. The District Attorney General would not say what new evidence, or if indeed any new evidence, had come to light. All court documents that have previously been open to the public have since been expunged, meaning there is no official court record or any evidence of any charges ever being filed against Donnie Brantley. 18 months after being indicted for a second time, it was time to select a jury. However, a new announcement came that all charges against Donnie Brantley would again be dropped. The district attorney general said he was worried that the case would not make it as far as a jury and that it could not be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Since her last known whereabouts, no trace of Marcia Brantley has ever been found. Her social security number has not been used, no visas have been applied for, and there is no evidence that she left the United States. Her whereabouts remain unknown. Skidmore, Missouri is the setting of this tragic and disturbing story. In the interest of providing a bit of background, it's worth noting that this small town with a population of less than 400 people already had a big name when it came to crime. It became the center of a media firestorm in the early 1980s. A local man named Ken McElroy had a notorious reputation as a vicious bully. Accused of theft and rape amongst other things, he would often receive light sentences for his crimes, which angered the people of Skidmore. When leaving a local bar in 1981, he was shot dead in broad daylight in a vigilante-style execution. Despite his wife witnessing the murder, the town closed ranks and would not corroborate her version of events. And 20 years later, this refusal to talk and a stalled investigation would thrust Skidmore back into the spotlight once again. Branson Kane Perry was born on February 24, 1981. His parents divorced in late 2000, but he remained the apple of their eye and they adored him. He graduated from Nottoway Holt High School and soon after began working odd jobs around the neighborhood to support himself. He was an active young man and a black belt martial artist. After the divorce of his parents, he lived with his father at 304 West Oak Street in Skidmore. April 7, 2001. Perry visited his neighbor, Jason Behrman, and while he was there, he ended up being inadvertently drugged. While under the influence, he stripped naked and ended up having sex with Behrman. It was known that Branson was gay and had sexual encounters in the past, but he felt embarrassed and upset and he confided in his father, Bob. Bob knew about his son's sexuality, but he was furious that his son had been taken advantage of. For days later, Branson invited a friend called Gina over to his house. Bob had been in hospital and was due home soon. Branson wanted to have the house tidy for him when he returned. At the same time, two unnamed men were carrying out repair works on Bob's car outside. The events of that day remain unclear. The following is an excerpt taken from a blog post made by Rebecca Clino. The events of that day are fairly sketchy to me and often make no sense. I don't have a timeline of when they occurred, only sporadic comments that were made. At one point, the friends saw Branson run into the kitchen and take something out of the cabinets, then run out the back door. When he returned, she said he wouldn't tell her what he was doing and acted like nothing had happened. Later, she said she had taken a shower and when she came out of the bathroom, she saw one of the men that was working on the car going through the cabinets in the kitchen. She said she had asked him what he was looking for, he told her nothing and went back outside. Then at approximately 3 p.m. she had been upstairs when she heard the front porch door shut. She looked out the window and saw Branson. She asked him where he was going and he told her he was going to put the jumper cables into the storage shed and would be right back. She never saw him again. The men that had been working on the car claimed to have never seen him. No one saw him. When Branson didn't return from outside, Gina says that she believed he had simply gotten sidetracked, so she left his house and went home. The next day, April 12th, Branson's grandmother, Joanne, stopped by the Perry residence. When she got to the house, she realized no one was home and that the door was unlocked. Over the next few days, she continued to call the house but would get no answer. She contacted Branson's mother and they realized that neither had spoken to him. Bob was discharged from hospital a few days later than expected and he and his wife went to report Branson as a missing person on April 17th. County police organized a 15-mile radius search of the area surrounding Branson and Bob's home. They could find no trace of him in the fields or abandoned buildings. Police also couldn't locate the jumper cables he said he was taking to the shed. It wasn't until 2 weeks later that they were found just inside the door. For the following 6 weeks, the police interviewed at least 100 people in Skidmore in an attempt to piece together Branson's movements and generate any new leads. They spoke to his friend Gina, who was one of the last people to see Branson. She told the police that Branson had been experimenting with drugs, namely marijuana and amphetamines. This was confirmed by a member of his family who said that he had a bottle of Valium with him on the day he disappeared. Following this lead, police began investigating other drug users who were known to Branson, but they all passed polygraph tests when they said they had not seen him. Rumors circulated that Branson was indebted to local drug dealers, but no information surrounding this came to light. Bob's first thought was that he was embarrassed by his encounter with Bierman and as a result had gone to Kansas City to see friends. He also assumed he could have hitchhiked as he didn't have a working car. The investigation into what happened to Branson stalled and nothing new would arise until 2003. On April 10th of that year, a 59-year-old pastor and scout leader called Jack Wayne Rogers was arrested. Allegations ranged from child pornography and assault to practicing medicine without a license after he removed the genitalia of a trans woman in a hotel room, in a botched gender reassignment operation. After being unable to stop her from bleeding, his victim called 911. While investigating him, they uncovered numerous posts he had made on message boards pertaining to the torture and assault of various men. One of these posts stood out to investigators. In it, he claimed to have been flagged down by a blonde male hitchhiking. He described raping, torturing, and mutilating the young man. He also claimed that the victim had been buried in a secluded area of the Ozarks. Police believed that there was a possible connection to Branson. However, Rogers denied seeing him, let alone knowing him. He said all the posts he had made were part of a fantasy and completely made up. The law enforcement were not convinced. They continued searching Rogers' house and in his car found a turtle claw necklace which bore a resemblance to one that Branson had owned. In April 2004, Rogers stood trial and was convicted of assault and performing an illegal surgery for which he received a sentence of 17 years and 7 years respectively. He also received a 30-year sentence for charges relating to child pornography which would run concurrently. Whilst he was being sentenced, Branson's mother Rebecca begged and pleaded with him for information on her son's whereabouts. He maintained that he did not know Branson and was not involved in his disappearance. Rebecca said she no longer believed Rogers was involved. She said in a statement, "The police are not completely ruling him out, but now the investigation has turned towards Skidmore again. They have received new leads there. I suppose time has a way of unraveling secrets. I believe someone in that area knows what happened to Branson. In my heart, I don't believe the suspect is responsible. Despite the nightmare I lived through at his sentencing, I am thankful that someone with that much evil will never walk the streets again." Sadly, just 3 years after the disappearance of his son, Bob passed away in 2004. The police and Branson's surviving family refused to give up. 8 years after he vanished, the police received what they referred to as a credible tip that Branson's remains could be in Quitman, Missouri. However, this lead, like all others, would go nowhere. To add to the tragedy, after a long fight with cancer, Rebecca Clino, Branson's mother, passed away in 2011. The Q Center for Missing Persons founder Monica Clayson, who was a personal friend of Rebecca, vowed to carry on the search for Branson and not give up hope. Rebecca was buried alongside an empty plot for Branson, which listed his date of death as April 11, 2001, the day he was last seen alive. Branson's case remains open, and the police and family still hope that one day the questions surrounding Branson's disappearance will be answered. If you have any information relating to the disappearance or whereabouts of Branson Perry, please contact the relevant authorities. CCTV often plays a vital role in investigating crimes. It can help piece together events and be a vital witness when there may be no others. In the age of CCTV, it remains a mystery how some people can seemingly vanish without a trace. With cameras picking up at every move, what happens when a CCTV trail goes cold and an investigation hits a brick wall? This is the story of the disappearance of Trevor Deely. On the 15th of August, 1978, and Michael Deely welcomed their 5th child, a little boy named Trevor. He grew up in County Kildare and soon became an extremely intelligent and career-driven young man. He developed an aptitude for business and technology and by his early 20s had landed a job in the IT department of the Bank of Ireland Asset Management team. The work Christmas party was scheduled for the December 7, 2000. Drinking began at Copper Face Jack's in the Hilton before it carried on to Buck Whaley's nightclub on Lower Leeson Street. 22-year-old Trevor left Buck Whaley's around 3:30 a.m. He walked in the direction of the Renoir complex where he had an apartment on Serpentine Avenue. Trevor arrived at his office and security let him in. He made a cup of tea and spoke to his colleague, Carl, who was on the night shift. Trevor checked his emails and made a schedule of what needed to be done the following day. Due to a heavy storm and a taxi strike, he left at 4:03 a.m. with his umbrella in hand and carried on foot. He rang a friend of his in County Kildare and the friend described the voicemail as, "Hi Glenn, I missed you there. Just on my way home, all going good. I'll talk to you tomorrow." The message was regarded as innocuous by his friend and it was deleted. CCTV footage from the bank showed a man dressed in black that was waiting outside for around 30 minutes before Trevor appeared. When he got there, Trevor and the man engaged in brief conversation, but by the time Trevor left the bank, the man in black had gone. At 4:14 a.m., CCTV captured Trevor walking past what was the AIB Bank on the corner of Bagot Street Bridge and Haddington Road, heading towards his apartment. Around 30 seconds later, a man in black takes the same route. The Gardaí believed that this is the same man that was stood outside the bank and spoke to Trevor. This footage of him at 4:14 a.m. is the last known sighting of him. Due to the heavy partying the night before, Trevor's failure to turn up at work was not his flatmates were away that weekend and did not know he was missing. When Trevor failed to show up on Monday, the alarm was raised. The bank called his family and after confirming that no one had spoken with him that weekend, he was reported as a missing person. The family's take charge approach drew praise from the Gardaí. Detective Sergeant Michael Fitzgerald, who worked the case from the beginning, said, "I have never worked a case where the family has been so proactive." His friends and family handed out thousands of leaflets when knocking on doors and put posters up all over Dublin. However, due to the days that had passed from his last known sighting to him being reported missing, vital time and clues had been lost. In the weeks before his disappearance, Trevor had flown to Alaska to meet a girl that he had befriended while she was holidaying in Dublin. Two Gardaí traveled out to Alaska to talk to her, but this proved to be another dead end. The Garda Sabaqua team scoured the River Dodder and the Grand Canal but turned up nothing. Trevor's sister Michelle said that she called his phone a few times over the weekend he went missing and she believes that it rang out. Dr. Philip Perry, a senior research fellow in radio and optical communications laboratory at Dublin City University, said that had Trevor's phone gone into the water, it would have died within seconds. Michelle has since stated that she is not 100% sure it rang. And still no trace. The investigation was reopened in December of 2016. In April 2017, the CCTV footage was enhanced and released to the public. The Gardaí said they believed that the man seen following Trevor was the same man from outside the bank. He remains a person of interest and to date, no one has come forward. In August that same year, the Gardaí began searching a secluded area stretching 3 seen on the CCTV footage. They had received a tip that Trevor had been murdered that night by a criminal from Crumlin, County Antrim, a criminal that was well known to the Gardaí. He was involved in a prostitution and drug gang who operated in the area that Trevor was last seen. The gang had also been investigated in June 1998 for the murder of Sinead Kelly, a young prostitute who had been stabbed to death on Grand Canal Bank. The informant said that Trevor had crossed paths with his murderer by chance and it was simply a case of wrong place, wrong time. By September, the search had been called off. Trevor's case remains open and is yet unsolved. If you have any information relating to the disappearance or whereabouts of Trevor Deely, please contact the relevant authorities. The disappearance of Marilyn Bergeron captivated Canada. Born in Quebec in 1983, she was a bright and gifted child, with a love for the arts, music, and languages. Her open and inquisitive nature meant she was fascinated by different cultures and ways of life. Her parents described friends that could be a bad influence, and she could sometimes find herself in trouble due to her recklessness. Her passion for the arts meant she graduated with a degree in media arts and technology, and she would eventually move to Montreal in 2005. She was able to use her degree by working as a freelance editor for local stations and worked as a sales assistant. Her ultimate dream was to become a flight attendant, a job that would show her the world and everything it had to offer. However, this bright and happy young woman would soon become a frightened and paranoid one. In early 2008, she told her family she wanted to return to Quebec City as she was too frightened and didn't feel safe being in Montreal. February 10, 2010, Marilyn leaves her apartment in Hochelaga, Massaneer, suddenly, and by the 16th of February, she's moved back home to Quebec City to be with her parents. It became clear to her family that something was deeply wrong. She appeared withdrawn and troubled. Her sister Natalie said that when questioned, Marilyn would refuse to talk and break down in tears. Marilyn denied it was financial woes, drug misuse, or relationship problems. Her mother persisted and asked if someone had assaulted her. To cry. Her mother begged her to seek the help of a psychologist and lift the emotional load that she had been carrying for so long. The day after settling back in with her family on February 17, 2010, she told her parents she wanted to go for a walk. She wore her black coat and suede boots, took her credit card, and left. At around 11 a.m., she was spotted on CCTV trying to withdraw $60 from an ATM in Loretteville, but her card was declined. The footage shows her repeatedly looking over as if on the lookout for something or someone. That afternoon, she went to a coffee shop, Cafe Depot, and paid using her card. The clerk said that she appeared agitated and eager to leave. When Marilyn didn't come home that night, her parents knew something was desperately wrong, and they reported her as a missing person to the police. Investigators traced her card to the ATM and coffee shop, and her parents scoured the city, handing out flyers in a desperate attempt to find their daughter. The story of her disappearance quickly became front-page news. Images of her circulated through different media circuits, and the investigation ramped up. When the police discovered the CCTV of the withdrawn and anxious Marilyn parents, they were concerned it would cause them too much unnecessary distress. When her parents eventually watched the footage back, they agreed that she looked helpless. Famed crime reporter Claude Poirier examined the case as part of his TV show Poirier Enquête. When standing at the same ATM, he theorized that she could have been looking at a parked car on the street, which would have been in her line of vision. Further credence is added to this argument when considering that it was a 16-mile trip from her parents' house to the coffee shop. While it was feasible that she walked as she was fit and healthy, her family argue it was more reasonable that she was driven by someone, but to date no one has come forward saying they gave her a lift. The trail quickly went cold and all leads were dead ends. It would be 2 years before any kind of breakthrough. A man got in contact with Claude Poirier saying that Marilyn was in Hawkesbury, Ontario, and that he'd seen her there consistently in the area for over a year. Other locals confirmed this after seeing a photograph of her. They agreed that she had been living there with a man. Marilyn's family became frustrated with the lack of progress surrounding her disappearance. The police had not considered foul play and were treating it as a disappearance and possible suicide. Her family continued making requests to have the Sûreté de Québec, the SQ, or the Montreal police examine her case. The SQ can investigate across the province and had a formidable reputation, and the Montreal police can investigate in the city from which she fled. The requests of the family to have either force take over her case were rejected, and the family expressed their frustration at a press conference in February 2017. The Quebec City Police responded to the criticism and have done all they can to keep the family informed with the investigation. The SQ said through a spokesperson, in this case, wherever required, the Sûreté de Québec offered its full cooperation and support to the Quebec City Police Service. The reward to find their daughter was increased to $30,000 Canadian dollars. Their lawyer, former Justice Minister for the province, Marc Bellemare, expressed disappointment with investigators for refusing to hand over to either the SQ or the Montreal police. He also announced that a tip line had been set up in order to gather any possible leads on Marilyn's whereabouts. The family held another press conference in November that year where they announced that 43 sightings had been reported to the tip line. Jonathan Gaultier, who had known Marilyn in college, had reconnected with her in 2007 while she was still in Montreal. He spoke with journalists on the 10th of December. He explained that she had become increasingly fearful and reclusive in the 2 months before her disappearance. He said that when he and Marilyn were going to the same party, he was shocked by the sudden change in Marilyn's personality. She was no longer the inquisitive and positive young woman she once was. Instead, she was despondent and listened to her music in the dark. When they got to the party, her mood slightly improved. But after talking with a friend, she quickly became frightened and anxious, as if she'd been reminded of something she wanted to forget. Quickly asked to go home. When they returned to her apartment, her demeanor deteriorated rapidly and she began to cry uncontrollably. Jonathan tried to comfort her and to get her to explain what had happened. He asked if she had been raped or witnessed a murder. She said no, something much worse had happened. He continued to ask her what it was, but she would not say any more. She said to him, "You can't even begin to imagine what I've been through, Joe." He is quoted as saying, "I tried to get her to say what it was for 3 or 4 hours. I got the impression she did not want to put me in danger." The case of Marilyn Bergeron remains open. And since leaving the coffee shop on February the 17th, 2010, no trace of Marilyn has ever been found. If you have any information relating to the disappearance or whereabouts of Marilyn Bergeron, please contact the relevant authorities. Before we proceed, I've got an exciting surprise for you. We've launched a brand new channel dedicated to intriguing content such as old historical mysteries, cold cases, and particularly chilling horror stories perfect for bedtime. Drop a comment letting us know if you're a fan of horror stories or not. You can find the link in the description below. Let's find out who will be the first to explore it. Alright, let's dive back into the video. When thinking about what makes somewhere a great place to live, we often consider the safety, the community, the friendliness of the locals, and there is one country that ticks all the boxes. Located off the east coast of Greenland, Iceland has been consistently voted one of the best countries in the world to live in. With a population of just over 340,000, one of the world's smallest, its breathtaking natural beauty packs a big punch. Natural springs and rolling hills attract tourists from all over the world. People travel from far and wide to experience the riches the small country has to offer, from the incredible architecture to the phenomenon of the aurora borealis. Winters means sunlight can be scarce, but this merely adds to the intrigue of Iceland, a place so far removed from what most of us know and understand. One of the most appealing things about Iceland is the friendliness, openness, and kindness of its people. Due to the tough terrain and harsh winters, people rely on each other, value community, and take care of their neighbors. There are strong social attitudes against crime, they have no army, and their police officers do not. People often leave their doors unlocked and get lifts with strangers. One Friday night in 2017, the peace and tranquility of Iceland would be shattered and a nation would be left reeling by a seemingly random, motiveless, and brutal murder. This is the story of Birna Bransdóttir. Birna Bransdóttir lived in the southeast of Reykjavik. While her parents were no longer together, they remained on friendly terms, and she was the center of their world. She was bright and spirited, with her fiery personality reflected in her striking auburn hair. She was incredibly witty with a sharp sense of humor, which made her popular amongst her friends. She was carefree and whimsical, but always responsible. With this maturity reflected in her relationship with her family and her mature attitude to work. Music was a big passion, and Birna wasn't picky. She would listen to anything from rap to pop and from rock to folk. It was this openness and free spirit that made so many people love her. Birna had a close-knit circle of friends and would enjoy the nightlife of Reykjavik. She worked in the fashion section of a busy department store and would unwind after work by going to the local bar for drinks before heading out to really let her hair down. And on the 13th of January 2017. This is exactly what Birna did. That night, she closed up the shop and went for drinks and a few rounds of cards before heading into the center of the capital for a night of laughing, drinking, and dancing. They went to Hura, where the up-and-coming bands would play, and before long, Birna was dancing on the stage. Her friends were ready to leave by 2 a.m., but Birna wasn't. She wanted to carry on enjoying herself. Just before 5 a.m., she left the club and walked out into the -9 degrees weather before heading for a falafel and walking in the direction of her home. A woman walking alone in Reykjavik was not rare. People trusted each other and looked out for each other. Due to her intoxication, she dropped coins and stumbled into a stranger on the side of the road. As she carried on walking, she turned a corner and walked down a narrow lane towards the sea. Then she vanished. Her punctual reputation meant that when she failed to turn up for work, people were immediately concerned. One of her friends from school, Maria, who worked with Birna, was instantly unsettled by her absence. This was only made worse when she tried to call her mobile. It wouldn't connect, and Birna never turned off her phone. People suspected she had just gone back to her father's house to nurse her hangover. This is also what her friends thought who had been out with her that night, but she wasn't there. Birna's mother, Silla, was called, and she too was concerned over her daughter's whereabouts. She knew Birna, and she knew this was out of character. Her family wasted no time. They went straight to the police and reported her missing. Stiller posted to her Facebook page, "Dear friends, it's not like her that we can't reach her. Please share and let's find her. Silla." Iceland is a small community, and before long Silla's desperate pleas on Facebook were being shared and news of Birna's disappearance began to circulate. The stress and worry of having a child go missing is unimaginable. Her parents couldn't sleep. They persistently made calls to all the emergency services, desperately seeking any new information on Birna's whereabouts. The following day, the police were able to trace her last known mobile interaction. Before it went dead or was turned off just before 6 a.m., her phone pinged off a mobile tower in a port town Hafnarfjordur, 6 miles outside of the capital. Silla wasted no time and drove there, calling out to her daughter and searching the area. She was helped by a team of family and friends who were determined to bring since Birna had disappeared into the Reykjavik night. Her family and friends were adamant that something terrible had happened to her. She was a reliable young woman, and this was completely out of character. The police, however, had little to go on. They had no evidence of a murder or abduction, so there was not much they could do. As news of her disappearance carried on spreading, it quickly became headline news. Berner's face was plastered over newspapers and her name was in the mouth of every news anchor in Iceland. In the early hours of Sunday morning, her parents went to the police and begged them to search for her. They said she would not have gone off of her own accord, much less not told anyone where she was going. She had no money troubles or relationship problems. Everyone who knew Berner adored her. A case as baffling and unusual as this required Iceland's best detectives, one of which was Grimur Grimsson. He had 30 years of investigative experience. He was even part of a special team who spent more than 5 years building a case against those whose misconduct and corruption contributed to the financial crash of 2009. After this, he returned to his roots as a police officer, saying he missed the fast-paced work. Initially, they concerned about Berner. There were many other factors that he had to consider. People do go missing in Iceland. Anything from mental health problems to simply staying at a friend's house and not telling people. Most missing people would eventually turn up. Capital cities throughout the world are laden with CCTV, but Reykjavik isn't like most capital cities. The Icelandic population have negative attitudes towards surveillance, and due to the low rates of crime, the population tends to police itself. They take care of each other and look out for strangers. But she was spotted on the night of her disappearance. CCTV showed her leaving the club, dropping her coins, and walking into the stranger. When Grimsson checked the next camera less than a block away, she was gone. There were two options. Either she had gone down the side road off the corner or got into a car. Grimsson had a keen eye for detail and was sure that there was a clue in that grainy CCTV that would eventually lead them to Berner. He noticed a car, a red Kia Rio, going on the opposite side of the road to Berner. He watched as it drove past the Lebowski bar seconds after Berner had been seen there. This was a lead the officers had to pursue. Then came the next problem. They couldn't make out the license plate, who was driving, or how many were in the car. Cars are that make a model in Iceland. This did nothing to calm the fears of her parents. Scylla was incandescent when they explained the quality of the tape was too poor to extract any more details from. Scylla said, "Can't you find it like in the movies?" Grimsson replied, "It doesn't work like that." The police knew that while they didn't have enough in terms of CCTV, they did have a community with a spirit of hope. They appealed to the people of Iceland for their help. They held a rare press conference. Grimsson and Berner's distraught family went before the cameras and begged Iceland for its assistance in finding her. Scylla showed the media what kind of person her daughter was, explaining she was extremely intelligent, bilingual, with a love of other cultures and a passion for exploring. The police hunched that the press conference would lead to a breakthrough proved right, and before long, they had their first lead. A pair of brothers decided to search Hafnarfjordur, where her phone had pinged off of the tower, and when there, they headed towards the harbor. After searching in a fenced-off area, they found a pair of boots, black Doc Martens, identical to the pair that Berner had last been seen wearing. Using the power of social media, they posted a picture of them to Facebook, and before long the officers arrived. They confirmed the shoes were Berner's. Finally, the police felt like they were getting somewhere. Grimsson demanded officers scour through the CCTV with a fine-tooth comb, and soon they saw a familiar picture. At 6 a.m. on the morning, Berner vanished. A red Kia Rio pulled into the harbor. A man climbed out of the car and staggered off in a drunken state towards a fishing trawler that had docked there. The car then drove off. Finally, they could make out a number plate. The car had been rented by a 25-year-old fisherman from Greenland, Thomas Mahler Olsen. The car had since been rented by a family who complained of a stench of chemicals coming from the back. After impounding the car, officers were determined to find any trace of Berner, and soon they had a clue. Blood spots in the back seat. Samples were quickly gathered and sent off to Sweden for analysis in a desperate bid to see if it matched Berner. For Grimsson and his team, it was now a race against time. They needed to find the trawler and their only suspects, Thomas Mahler Olsen and Nikolaj Olsen. Thomas and Nikolaj weren't related, but were crewmates on the trawler. Thomas was considered easygoing, approachable, and generally likable. Whilst on board, his phone pinged. Thomas went pale. It was a news article saying that the ship he was on was linked to the disappearance of Berner. A journalist had contacted a Facebook group used by the men on board and asked who had rented the car and who was seen on the CCTV. Thomas was visibly shaken. His captain assured him that if he was innocent, he would be fine. The challenge for Grimsson and his team was huge. The longer his suspects were on that boat, the longer they had to align their stories and get rid of anything incriminating. He needn't have worried because the ship's captain had already formed a plan. And Burner so turned it around and headed back towards Iceland. He and his high-ranking officers agreed they would say engine problems had forced the turnaround and the Wi-Fi was disabled so that the suspects could not read anything about the case. The police were keen to use the element of surprise and so used members of their elite counterterrorism squad, also known as the Viking Squad, to board the ship as soon as it came back into Icelandic. Finally, the police had their 2 suspects in custody. The reaction of the public to the case was massive and the whole country was waiting on tenterhooks for any news of what had happened to Burner. The case seemed to take over all aspects of Icelandic life. Although their intentions were good, online sleuths only added to the confusion and it became hard to distinguish rumor from fact. Stories ranged from a body being found in a lake to Burner and other women being found alive on the trawler. Swirled around social media. Grimson remained calm and called for the same. However well-intentioned people were, it wasn't helping in the search for Burner. At around 11 p.m. on Wednesday night, the ship came back into port and the 2 suspects were brought back onto Icelandic soil in handcuffs. Then came the news that nobody wanted to hear. The blood in the rental car was Burner's. The police wasted no time in questioning the 2 men. Nikolaj and Thomas were sure that they had done nothing to Burner and gave similar accounts of the events of that fateful night. They had both separated and gone to different drinking spots before meeting up again as the night began to wind down. Nikolaj was already incredibly drunk and his account was hazy. Although Nikolaj could remember nothing about them, they said they had picked up 2 girls on the high street, one of which was Burner. Thomas said he dropped Nikolaj off at the shipaway. He then climbed into the back with the 2 girls where they kissed before he dropped them off an hour later. The police were inclined to believe Nikolaj. He had been seen walking away and was clearly in no fit state to do anything. However, when it came to Thomas, they had a bad feeling and the evidence against him was stacking up. He was examined by a doctor who determined the wounds on his chest were signs of a struggle or fight. When searching the ship, the police found a driver's license in the bin. Belonged to Burner, they also found drugs with a street value of nearly £1.5 million. He claimed to have slept in the car, but the police checked the odometer, which showed that the car had been taken for a long drive. CCTV would prove to be their friend also, as he was seen in a shop buying plastic bags and cleaning fluid before scrubbing the inside of the car. Police didn't believe his excuse that he had been sick and was simply trying to clean it. Burners, and when they used luminol to highlight any blood not seen with a naked eye, the back of the car lit up. It was absolutely covered in blood. For days after she vanished, Iceland launched the biggest search in its history. The search and rescue project manager said, "Today she is our sister, our daughter," that became the mantra. We don't live in a society where we tolerate a 20-year-old woman being abducted in the night. It wouldn't be long before the police found what they were looking for. A Coast Guard helicopter noticed something floating in the water near a local lighthouse. It was a body. They had found Burner. And with this announcement, Iceland plunged into mourning. The shock and disbelief was palpable. This was the kind of thing that happened in movies and other countries. It didn't happen in Iceland. Citizens of Greenland were also appalled and grieved alongside their Nordic neighbor. The high street in Reykjavik from which Burner had disappeared became a shrine, lit up by candles. Burner's funeral was held at the biggest church in the country. The Hallgrímskirkja Prime Minister, the public wanted answers and the police needed to provide them. First, they had to ascertain the cause of death. Burner had been found naked, but they could find no evidence of a sexual assault. The examiner found that she had suffered blunt force trauma to the head and had been strangled as well. However, the official cause of death was ruled as drowning. She had survived the initial attack and was alive when she was put into the water. Grimson and his team examined the evidence in front of them. They could find no link between Burner's murder and Nikolaj, and they did not believe he was involved. After 2 weeks in custody and hours of interrogation, he was freed. Their attention now turned back to Thomas. His story remained the same and he wasn't changing it. Over the course of 9 interviews with police, he maintained his innocence. While the police had their crime scene in suspect, they could find no reason or motive as to why Thomas would murder Burner, but the evidence continued to mount. They'd been able to find his DNA, Burner's, Doc Martens, and his fingerprints were found on her discarded driving license. On the 30th of March 2017, breaking news alerts were spreading all over Iceland. The police had charged Thomas Mahler Olsen with drug possession and murder. Media interest in the story reached a fever pitch as his trial began in August of that year. It was during his trial that he sensationally changed his story. He said that there were not two girls, only one burner. He said that he had left the car to go to the bathroom and Nikolaj had driven off with Burner in the back seat, and when he returned she wasn't with him. The court was stunned. He was now trying to pin the murder on his crewmate. With a low voice and a face covered, he admitted to the drug possession but denied murder. In September, the three judges had reached their verdict. Guilty on all counts, and he was led away to begin his 19-year prison sentence. Thomas Mahler Olsen has appealed his conviction, but the High Court upheld it, and the following year the High Court refused to consider another appeal. The murder of Bernad Brandstoter was a crime that shook Iceland. The chaplain who presided over Bernad's funeral said, "This case will be remembered. It changed us a bit. Our feeling of security." CCTV around Reykjavik was increased, and women became more wary of strangers. For Grimel Grimson, despite 30 years of service, this had been his first murder case. His calm and coordinated approach made him a hero in Iceland. He now proudly represents his country in the European Union's Agency for Law Enforcement Cooperation based in The Hague. Despite the tragic events surrounding the murder of Bernadette Brandstoter, her memory continues to be kept alive, and the people of Iceland are determined that she will never be forgotten. Los Angeles, California. It's one of the most famous places in the world. Home to the rich and famous and the epitome of glamour, people travel from all over the globe in their bid for fame and fortune. It's the place where dreams come true and where anything is possible. However, under the surface lies a dark underbelly of crime, and throughout the 1960s and 70s, women began to disappear, and in frighteningly similar circumstances, some would turn up dead, others would never be seen again. Today, we're looking at the disappearance of Robin Graham and California's missing women. Robin Graham was born on the 22nd of June, 1952. Growing up in Echo Park, Los Angeles, she lived with her parents Marvin and Beverly. She was a small girl, around 5 feet 6 inches, weighing 125 pounds, but she had a big personality and an even bigger heart. She was a bright student and graduated from John Marshall High School, and this hard work continued as she began attending Pierce College as well as working at Pier 1 Imports in Hollywood. Along with balancing work and school, she was in a loving relationship and had a busy social life. On the 14th of November, 1970, Robin left her car at Pier 1 Imports and got a lift with her boyfriend as she headed for a night out. After a night of laughter and dancing, she got a lift back to the car and set off driving down the Hollywood freeway at around 2 o'clock in the morning. Just minutes into her journey, her car stalled near the Santa Monica Boulevard off-ramp. Seconds after pulling to the side of the road, California Highway Patrol officers came to her aid. They offered to call the stranded Robin a tow truck, however she politely declined and instead used a phone box to call home. Her sister passed the message on to her parents, and they said they would be there as soon as possible. The patrol officers decided to loop around and double-check on her. She was back at her car and told them that she had contacted home and was waiting for her lift. Happy she would soon be off the freeway, the officers carried on driving. Upon their third time of driving past Robin, they saw a light blue Corvette parked behind her car, and she was talking to a man. He was around 5'8" in his 20s with bell-bottom trousers and a turtleneck. The patrolman saw the two ride off in his car together and said she appeared to go willingly. Believing she was now safely with her family, they continued on their way. Around half an hour after her car broke down, her family arrived. Her Dodge was locked and she had gone. Investigators were stumped. Once the car had disappeared into the busy Los Angeles traffic, the chances of finding it again were slim. Initial reports said that Robin had willingly got in the car with the man. However, the officer who made that report was questioned again and said that while he saw them talking, he didn't see them leave together. The California Highway Patrol faced an immediate backlash for their conduct on the night Robin vanished. People were outraged that they had left a teenage girl on the highway in the company of a strange man in the middle of the night. Even the Los Angeles County Supervisor agreed with the criticism, but the officers in question were determined to have acted in accordance with procedure when dealing with stranded drivers. After the uproar, the policy was changed to ensure that no woman stranded on the highway would be left alone. The disappearance was investigated by the Rampart Division of the LAPD, and alarm bells were ringing for officers. A couple of years before Robin went missing, numerous women were attacked in what would later be dubbed the Good Samaritan attacks. The suspect would follow the same pattern. He would follow their car and begin flashing his headlights. When they pulled over, he would approach them saying he noticed a problem with the back tires, and when they were off guard, he would attack them. The police told members of the public to be wary of people posing as Good Samaritans and told them not to pull over if they were signaled to by a stranger. After the attacks, the perpetrator seemingly vanished. The more the police investigated, the more disturbing similarities they found to previously unsolved cases. Around a year before Robin's disappearance, an Israeli-born student named Rose Tashman was driving down the Hollywood freeway when her car got a flat tire. Police found her car abandoned and her body would later be discovered, strangled and dumped in the Hollywood Hills. A few months after Rose Tashman, another woman, Cindy Lee Mellon, disappeared. She too had a flat tire. Her father said she would not have known how to change one. Colleagues said they had seen her talking with a man who they assumed was her father. After realizing Cindy hadn't been seen, her father drove to the Buenaventura shopping center where she'd worked. The spare tire was on the ground nearby and her car had the trunk, doors, and glove box open. One of her tires had been slashed with a knife. Cindy Lee Mellon was never seen again. Women in California just kept disappearing and the police had no real answers. In 1971, Lisa Smith vanished while hitchhiking in Santa Rosa on Hearn Avenue. She was only 17 years old at the time of her disappearance. The following year, Ernestine Torello ended up with a flat tire on the Ventura Freeway. Her body was later found in the Santa Monica Mountains. The police believed that she had been killed by someone who pulled over using the facade of helping her with her tire. Just 5 days after Ernestine Torello was last seen, 20-year-old Jeanette Kamahili was seen hitchhiking in Santa Rosa on Highway 101. A friend of Jeanette was heading to pick her up. Before they could make it to her, she was seen with a white man in his 20s and, like all the other women, was never seen alive again. Mona Jean Gallegos left her friend's house at around 1 a.m. on June 19, 1975. Her car was found abandoned on the San Bernardino Freeway at Santa Anita Avenue at 4:45 that morning. It was locked up with no gas. The police theorized she had gone to a nearby gas station and been offered a lift by someone there. 6 months later, her remains were found in the Riverside Ravine. The Times ran an article by Robert Kitzler which said that detectives believed her disappearance was identical to that of Robin Graham's. There are a few theories surrounding the disappearance of Robin Graham. After news of her disappearance broke, the Los Angeles Times covered the story. This would lead them to their first proper witness. A woman came forward saying that she had stalled on the Hollywood freeway just like Robin had. She was approached by a man in a Corvette. He claimed to be an off-duty police officer and suggested that she catch a ride with him. After she refused, he quickly sped off into the night. 1 month later, she was able to identify him. A man called Bruce Davis. A look at Bruce Davis's history paints a frightening picture. He had been a high-profile member of the notorious Manson family cult, responsible for a string of infamous murders that sent Los Angeles into a tailspin of fear and still captures the attention of the public all these years later. Although he wasn't involved in the cult's most notorious crime, the Tate LaBianca murders, he was right-hand man to its leader, Charles Manson. Davis was later convicted of 2 murders, both connected to the Manson family. He is also a suspect in several disappearances and unsolved murders in California, including the brutal and frenzied murder of a couple in Silver Lake, not far from Los Angeles. Both victims have been stabbed at least 40 times with ferocity and fury. This potential link to Bruce Davis forced the investigators to examine another frightening possibility that maybe Robin Graham had fallen victim to the Zodiac Killer. Bruce Davis was one of those suspected of being the notorious unknown criminal. The Zodiac's first known attack was in Northern California in 1968, and he has 5 confirmed victims, but there could be many more. He would strike at random in motiveless and brutal attacks that would leave California paralyzed, not knowing who would be next. It's worth noting that Robin went missing on a full moon, which was one of the signatures of the Zodiac. He would taunt the police with cryptic letters and relish the attention given to him by the media. However close the police thought they were to catching him, he was always one step ahead. This potential link to the Zodiac took the police back to the previously unsolved Good Samaritan attacks. Kathleen Johns was driving to San Francisco with her young child 8 months before Robin Graham's disappearance. A car came up behind her and began to flash the headlights. After pulling over, a man got out of the car and said that her back wheel was wobbling and offered to fix it for her. Instead, he loosened it, and as she tried to drive away, it completely came off. He offered to take her to a local gas station, and thinking her and her child would be safe, she accepted. He approached the gas station and slowly drove past it. She nervously asked where they were going, and he replied, "Before I kill you, I'm going to throw your baby out the window." He continued driving for an hour and a half, telling her, "You know you're going to die." She managed to escape with her child and hid in a field, but he did not give up easily. He scoured the area with a torch, determined to hunt her down. He only left when he heard the sound of a nearby truck approaching. She managed to flag down a car who drove her to the safety of a police station. As she sat and waited to make her report, she looked up to a poster on the wall. On it was the face of the man who had terrorized her and threatened the life of her and her child. It was a wanted poster for the Zodiac Killer. Robin Graham's parents never lost hope. They remained at the same house with the same phone number, waiting for their beloved daughter to return home. But tragically, to date, no trace of Robin Graham has ever been found. To think that these women fell victim to a supposed Good Samaritan under the guise of being helped when they were at their most vulnerable is a truly terrifying thought. And sadly, the true fate of California's missing women will most likely remain a mystery. In 1992, Hurricane Andrew was wreaking havoc throughout Mississippi. As the storm tore through the Northeast, a 13-year-old girl disappeared. According to the police, she was the unsuspecting victim of a callous and calculated criminal who used the chaos of the storm as a cover for her abduction and possible murder. Today, we're looking at the disappearance of Lee Achi. Lee Achi was born on August 21, 1979 to parents Donald Achi and Vicky Felton. Her parents had both served in the military, and after their divorce in 1981, Donald was relocated. He and his daughter enjoyed a close relationship and would visit each other whenever possible. While she was born in Honolulu, Hawaii, her and her mother eventually moved to Tupelo, Mississippi. In late August 1992, phenomenal rain and furious winds were raging throughout Tupelo. On the night of the 26th, Lee slept in her mother's bed due to her fear of storms. The following morning, they had breakfast together and discussed the day ahead of them. Lee was going to go to an open house at her middle school with her grandmother as the new semester hadn't yet started. Later that evening, Vicky and Lee were going to go out for a meal. Vicky left for work at around 7:30 a.m. This was a big step for her as it was the first time that 13-year-old Lee would be left alone at home. She had only become a teenager the week before. When she arrived at work, Vicky heard on the news that Hurricane Andrew was heading their way and so called the house to check on Lee. Lee never answered the phone. Panicking, Vicky tried again, but her call went unanswered. Knowing this was out of character for Lee, Vicky felt something was desperately wrong and so left work at 8:30 a.m. and headed straight home to 105 Honey Locust Drive. Upon arriving at the house, she saw that the garage door was open and the light was on. The light in the garage would only activate within a few minutes of the door being opened. She also noticed that another door to the house was unlocked. As it was the first time that she had left her daughter alone, she had been sure to secure the house before she had left. As panic began to set in, she went about searching the house for Lee. She called out Lee's name but was met with silence. When she went inside, she was confronted by a disturbing sight. A pool of blood on the floor, with blood splattered up the wall. When she made it to Lee's room, she saw that her favorite blanket had been left in a crumpled heap on the floor. It was then that Vicky called 911. She frantically told police that she needed assistance. Her daughter was missing and there was blood in the house. The police were quick to arrive on scene. They could find no evidence of a forced entry, leading investigators to believe that Lee could have opened the door to someone. Further searches of the house found even more blood, along with a significant pool in the hallway. Blood was also found in Lee's bedroom, the bathroom, and on her bedroom door. The blood was still wet and the splatter pattern and hair strands on the door frame were consistent with a significant head injury to someone around 5 foot. Lee was 4'10". The blood in the bathroom led investigators to believe that whoever had been at the house that morning had made an attempt to clean up. Based on the evidence stacking up in front of them, the police believed that Lee had been murdered inside the home. Upon searching her bedroom, Vicky told police that several notable items were missing, including Lee's shoes, some underwear, a sleeping bag, and her glasses. In the laundry basket, they found her blood-stained nightgown, meaning that Lee must have been wearing something else when she either left or was taken from the house. In charge of the investigation was Tupelo Police Chief Bart Aguirre, and he knew that the nightgown provided a vital insight into what could have happened to Lee. He said, because it looked like the blood had dripped down onto her nightgown, you would think that the injury had to be above the neck possibly. The police quickly mobilized and formed search teams throughout Tupelo in a desperate bid to find Lee. They had their description of her, 4'10", 95 pounds, with blonde hair and hazel eyes. The police trawled through the woodlands in the surrounding areas, but they could find no trace of her. Due to the weather, search dogs were unable to pick up a scent. While it is now the backbone of most police investigations, in the early 1990s, DNA testing was still in its infancy, so the police had to use blood typing. The investigators were able to determine that the blood was type O. Interviews were conducted with people throughout Tupelo. Family, friends, classmates, neighbors, and teachers were all questioned, but the police still had no credible leads. Rick Hammond, who wrote for the Daily Journal as a crime reporter, said, "The first few days, it was very frenzied in terms of trying to find out if she might be alive somewhere and injured, looking for places she might have been hidden, injured, lost." Her father Donald, who had been stationed out of state in Virginia at the time of her disappearance, could not contain his rage. This coward must have really felt like a tough man or woman to beat a little girl to death. Often I cannot help but think of how horrified Lee must have been while this piece of garbage beat her to death and watch her bleed out in the hall. The small city of Tupelo was suddenly at the center of a media firestorm. The place famous for being the hometown of Elvis Presley was now famous again, but this time for a much more sinister reason. It was the kind of place where people felt safe leaving their doors unlocked. It had a strong sense of community, and it was a place that people were proud to call their home. Rick Hammond said that the people of Tupelo wanted some sort of reassurance that this wasn't a stranger who showed up at a house and abducted a girl. Her father said she was a smart, sweet little girl. She was a daddy's kid like all little girls are. She liked to be hugged. She liked pizza. She liked dogs. This idyllic city had suddenly been turned upside down with the disappearance of one of their own. Everyone knew a girl like Lee. A week after her disappearance, a worker in McDonald's said they had seen a girl in the drive-thru that bore a resemblance to Lee. The police were quick to pursue it, however this would prove to be a false alarm. Rumors also began to swirl around Vicky's ex-boyfriend, Barney Yarborough. He and Vicky had recently called an end to their relationship, and Barney had allegedly been abusive towards Lee. There were also reports that Lee had arrived at school with a black eye and bruises, but this was not corroborated. He was immediately pulled in for questioning by investigators. However, he was able to provide a substantiated alibi and he passed a polygraph test. The police were back at square one. On September 9th, 2 weeks after Lee vanished from her home, a package arrived at the house. It was an 8-inch envelope addressed to Barney Yarborough, Vicky's ex-boyfriend, and the return address was the same as the mailing address. In it were Lee's glasses that had been taken from the house on the day she disappeared. The postmark showed it had been sent from nearby Boonville. After this, the FBI were drafted in to help with the investigation. It was sent to the state crime lab in Jackson for analysis of the handwriting and the DNA. They tried to extract DNA from the stamps on the envelope, but whoever had sent it had used water instead of saliva. The police chief believed that the glasses had been mailed in an attempt to divert the investigation. Donald was told by several locals to look more closely at Vicky. He commented saying, "I was already doing that. I don't know if her mother was involved." The police too would soon turn their attention to Vicky. As part of the investigation, she was given 3 separate polygraph tests, one with the Tupelo police and 2 with the FBI. Upon analyzing the results, independent examiners stated that she had shown signs of deception in every single test. The police chief said in 2017, "You still can't eliminate her. There are still too many unanswered questions for Vicky, and I don't know if that is unusual for somebody to go off to work and say, 'Well, I just left Lee, but I'm going to call and check on her.' Why check on her that soon after she just left her?" In a 2012 interview with the Daily Journal, Vicky said that Lee would never have opened the door to a stranger. So anyone Lee could have let in must have been someone she recognized and trusted. The person who she suspects is involved with her daughter's disappearance lived just a mile away from them, was a Bible school teacher, and shared Lee's passion for horses at the stables just off North Thomas Street. A man called Oscar McKinley Kearns. 9 months after Lee vanished from her home, Kearns abducted a girl he met through a church in Tupelo. She was alone at her house at around 7 a.m. when he arrived under the guise of taking her to school. Instead, he drove her to a secluded area in DeSoto County and subjected her to a horrific and prolonged sexual assault. He then drove her to school where she reported him to the police. He was convicted and sentenced to 24 years in prison, suspended for 16. After serving less than 4 years in custody, he was freed. He was again convicted in 1999 for kidnapping a couple and sexually assaulting the woman. On November 9, 1993, the Clarion Ledger reported that a skull had been found in a ditch in Monroe County and that it had been identified as Lee. A few days later, this was retracted. After further testing, it was revealed to be the remains of Pollyanna Sukeith, who had gone missing in March of that year. In 2009, Lee's mother Vicky said that she did not accept anything for sure, and until a body was found, she would remain hopeful that Lee is alive. Despite the suspicious circumstances surrounding the disappearance of Lee Oki, no trace of her has ever been found. Her father Donald said, "I don't know if we will ever find out what happened. If you have any information relating to the disappearance or whereabouts of Lee Oki, then please contact either the Crime Stoppers of Northeast Mississippi, the Tupelo Police Department, or the Federal Bureau of Investigation." Thousands of people go missing each year. Thankfully, most will turn up. Others will tragically be found dead, and some seemingly vanish without a trace. Today, we're looking at what happened to Helen Frost. On October 17, 1952, Dennis and Daphne Frost welcomed their second daughter, Helen, into the world. For years after her birth, the family made a big life change and moved thousands of miles away from the United Kingdom to British Columbia, Canada. Sisters Helen and Sandy had a stable childhood. Their parents were devoted to each other and their children, and Sandy said that they were good parents, despite their sometimes rebellious teenage girls. In 1969, Helen moved to Prince George, British Columbia, and she was joined in November by Sandy, a woman called Darlene, and Darlene's young baby. In the spring of 1970, Helen's life would be turned upside down as she fell pregnant. On the 13th of May, she gave birth to a baby girl who she called Sandra. Sandra would soon be taken into government custody. Helen left the home for unwed mothers and returned to Prince George. Her relationship with Sandra's father, Stefan, fell apart, and she was unsuccessful in her attempt to regain custody of her daughter. According to her sister, she left the social worker's office in tears, and they never spoke about the incident again. Helen's personality was an interesting mix. On the one hand, she could be quiet, private, and introverted. On the other hand, she could be impulsive and spontaneous. Her and her sister would hitchhike with strangers, and Helen was comfortable with this kind of hasty behavior. On the 13th of October, 1970, Helen was at home in her apartment on the 1600 block of Queensway in Prince George. Her sister Sandy came home at around 8 p.m. and Helen asked if she wanted to go for a walk with her, but Sandy said no, saying it was too cold. Around 20 minutes later, Helen said she would go for a quick walk by herself, and wearing her navy blue coat and blue trousers, she left. When Helen failed to return home that night, people were not immediately concerned. Her impulsive nature meant she could sometimes be gone without explanation. However, as time passed, her sister began to worry, and on the 15th of October, 2 days later, she was reported as a missing person. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, also known as the Mounties, were tasked with investigating Helen's disappearance. When she left to go for her walk, she left behind her clothes, money, and ID. The police had their description: around 5'5", about 125 pounds, blonde hair, blue eyes, with a right eye that drooped ever so slightly. The police soon received a tip that Helen had been hitchhiking from the Husky gas station in Prince George, but they could find no evidence of this, and before long, the trail had gone cold. Every lead would prove to be one dead end after another. One theory that was quickly ruled out was that Helen had been injured or died in a tragic accident. The police could find no evidence that she had been involved in any kind of accident. Investigators were quick to look at the possibility that Helen had run away. She had a history of hitchhiking and disappearing. However, her sister Sandy did not agree with this argument. She said that Helen had left her money, ID, clothes, other personal items, and had initially invited Sandy to go with her. The tough circumstances that Helen found herself going through at the time she went missing also led the Mounties to examine the possibility of suicide. Having recently lost custody of her own daughter and then living with Darlene and Darlene's young child could have been too much for Helen to bear. The difficulties she was facing could have led her to take her own life. Sandy also dismissed this theory, saying there was no evidence of a suicide, she hadn't left a suicide note, and she didn't seem out of character. There was speculation as whether or not Helen had met a friend after she left her Prince George apartment, and they were quick to interview her ex-boyfriend Stefan. After numerous interrogations, they deemed him not to be suspicious. Sandy said she had discovered a tip that Helen had possibly hitchhiked with a trucker. However, the police have not confirmed this. Highway 16 is an important part of the Yellowhead Highway. It's 450 miles long and stretches between Prince George and Prince Rupert in British Columbia, Canada. It's perhaps more commonly known as the Highway of Tears. It's been the site of numerous unsolved murders and disappearances, starting in 1970 with a disproportionately high number of the victims being Indigenous women. To investigate these unsolved crimes, the Mounties set up Project EPANA. The number of victims varies. The official list from the Mounties has it at no more than 18. However, Aboriginal and Indigenous organizations say that the number of women who have been murdered or gone missing on the Highway of Tears could be over 40. Chronologically, Helen Frost was the first woman to go missing on the Highway of Tears. Helen's family have fought tirelessly to have her name added to the EPANA victims list, and despite the pleas of her family, the Mounties denied their request. They said she did not meet the criteria for being a victim on the EPANA list. May 30th, 1974. The skeletonized remains of a woman are found wrapped up in a blanket buried in a shallow grave. The police theorized that the Jane Doe had died alongside a bank robber called Gustavus Lee Carmichael, who was most likely her boyfriend. They believe they had been murdered around December 31st, 1970, and this fits in with the plausible dates of Helen's timeline after she disappeared. The Jane Doe found in the shallow grave used the alias of Lorraine Stahl, and 2 people were convicted for the murders of her and Carmichael. Richard DeFreitas and Donald Brandt's motive was that Jane Doe was going to talk about Carmichael's criminal behavior and activity. In the months leading up to her death, Jane Doe made several phone calls to states on the eastern seaboard, and she was known to drive a 1964 green Oldsmobile which had either Maine or Massachusetts plates. The vehicle was later found dumped in Connecticut with a Maine inspection sticker. After speaking to people who interacted with Jane Doe, the police drew up a composite sketch which bore a resemblance to Helen Frost. Despite the similarities, the items that were found on the New London County Jane Doe were not seen with Helen on or around the time of her disappearance, including an almond-shaped ring with JHSN inscribed in it, a set of hair rollers, and a yellow raincoat. As of June 5, 2020, the Connecticut State Police and the Mounties are actively working to determine if the New London County Jane Doe is indeed Helen Frost. Tragically, on the 20th of July, 2014, Dennis Frost passed away without finding out what had happened to his beloved daughter. Her sister Sandy has never given up hope, and she has been the driving force behind the search for her sister Helen. In 2018, Helen's daughter Sandra reached out to Sandy after embarking on a search to find her birth mother, and the two were eventually reunited. Despite the suspicious circumstances surrounding the disappearance of Helen Frost, no trace of her has ever been found. Valentine's Day 2000. A father checks on his children to make sure they are both sound asleep. Little does he know that within just a few hours his daughter will be missing from her bed and she will never be seen alive again. This is the story of Aisha Degree. August 5, 1990. Aisha Degree is born to parents Harold and Akila. She's their second child and they live on 3404 Oak Crest Drive in Shelby, North Carolina. Aisha was born into a deeply religious and close-knit family. Along with her older brother O'Brien, they attended Macedonian Missionary Baptist Church every Sunday, which Aisha loved. They lived on the same street as their Aunt Alicia and grandmother Joanne. At school, Aisha was a remarkable young student. Her excellent attendance record and enthusiasm for learning, especially science and mathematics, made her a standout pupil. She was also a talented basketball player, but her ultimate dream was to become an illustrator. On February 12, 2000, Aisha played in a basketball game. It was important to her as it was the first game of the season, but her team suffered a defeat. Basketball was a big passion for Aisha and the loss upset her greatly. She blamed herself as she had fouled out during the game. That night she stayed at her cousin's and her mood started to improve. 2 days later, it was her parents' anniversary, Valentine's Day. Due to bad weather and a night, Harold was wide awake so stayed up to watch television. He checked on his children again at around 2:30 that morning. During the night, Aisha's brother O'Brien heard her moving in her bed. He then heard her get up and go to the bathroom. At 5:45, Akila woke to run a bath for her children. When she went to wake them up, she realized Aisha wasn't in bed. She assumed she had simply gotten herself up, but after realizing she wasn't downstairs and that her book bag and house key were gone, she started to panic. They called Aisha's grandmother Joanne and Aunt Alicia to see if she was with them when they confirmed that they hadn't seen her either. Her family called 911. Just after 6:30 a.m., Sheriff Dan Crawford and officers from the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office arrived on scene and started their search. The State Bureau of Investigation also arrived to scour the area, and just after 2 p.m. the Degree house was cordoned off. Officers were stumped by the strange disappearance. Sniffer dogs were unable to pick up a scent and there were no signs of a break-in or forced entry. The front and back door could be opened from the inside without a key, and there was no evidence of foul play in the house. The weather that night had been terrible, so why would a 9-year-old girl leave so suddenly? The police put a call out to local residents and neighbors to see if anyone had seen her, and by that afternoon they had 2 separate leads. One of them was a 25-year-old truck driver who had seen her face on the news while having his lunch. He had been driving his truck down the highway when he noticed Aisha walking by herself. He circled around 3 times, but when she spotted him, she left the road and ran into the woods. The second person who saw her was a former deputy with the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office. He was trucking with his son and noticed a small figure walking along the highway. They didn't stop, but put a call out to other truckers to be on the lookout. After speaking with his wife and realizing the possible connection to Asia, he went to the command post at Mulls Memorial Baptist Church to report the potential sighting. After checking the house, it appeared she had taken some candy, clothes, paper, and pencils along with her book bag. The police were baffled. Both investigators and her family couldn't understand why a mild-mannered and polite girl who followed the rules and had a happy home life would leave in the middle of the night. She was also terrified of dogs, and this would sometimes make her too scared to leave the house. The police widened the search to a 5-mile radius and carried on looking. It wouldn't be long before they found a potential trace of the missing Asia. Volunteers approached Raleigh and Debbie Turner and asked them to check their property for her. They owned an upholstery business, and on the plot of land stood an old, doorless shed that was about 300 feet off the road. After looking in the shed, they found wrappers that matched the candy she had been given at her basketball game. They also found a Minnie Mouse hairbow and a marker pen. Along with this, there was also a picture of a little girl. They handed the photo over to the police, but believed the other items were too far away from the house to be Asha's. The following day, they turned the other items over to investigators. Her family immediately identified all of them except one as belonging to Asha. They had never seen the photograph before, nor did they recognize the little girl, and neither did anyone from Asha's school. Based on this, the police theorized that she had walked south down Highway 18, where she was seen running into the woods. Debbie Turner's upholstery was around 20 minutes from where she'd lived. On February 20th and 9,000 man-hours later, the official search was called off. The authorities had gone through the area with a fine-toothed comb, but were confident that she wasn't there. In order to rule them out as suspects, her family undertook polygraph tests in March of that year, and they all passed. To offer an incentive for any information that would lead them to finding Aisha, her family put their money together and raised money from the local community to offer a $5,000 reward. They also put up a billboard where she had last been seen, in a desperate bid to generate any new leads. Also in March, Sheriff Crawford decided to re-interview Aisha's brother and her friends. Expertise of Kimberly Poyer, who was renowned in interviewing children. Her friends offered nothing substantial, but mentioned that Aisha had shown them some money she had in her purse on February 10th. It is not known where the money came from or if it was still in her possession when she disappeared. The summer of 2000 brought a twist to the case that nobody was expecting. A former classmate of Aisha's mother, a man called Baron Ramsey, confessed to being involved in her disappearance. He said that he and another man had been taking part in a drug deal when they had accidentally hit Aisha as she was walking down Highway 18. He said they knew instantly that she was dead and dragged her into the truck before driving to Moss Lake and dumping her body into the water. The police did 2 thorough searches of the lake but could find no trace of a body. They also went to where Ramsey said she had been hit and killed. They could find no evidence of an accident nor any of Aisha's blood. They believed he was trying to strike a better deal in an armed robbery case he was involved in, and as a result, he had made the whole thing up. Almost 18 months had passed before any new evidence came to light. August 2, 2001. Terry Fleming, a contractor, was doing work on a driveway along Highway 18. As he continued to dig up the ground, he found a black plastic bag. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, and after he finally got it open, he saw what was inside. It was a beige and black book bag, with the name Aisha Degree written in it alongside a phone number. He was unable to get service to call someone about it, so he wrote down the details and headed home. He mentioned what he had found to his wife the following morning. She instantly recognized the name and told him to contact the police straight away. According to Sheriff Crawford, the bag had been buried for some time and had also been double-wrapped. Law enforcement were coy about what exactly was in the bag, but Crawford said that 90 The Charlotte Observer reported that the items included clothing, a sheet of paper, and a pencil case. Authorities brought in cadaver dogs which alerted to 3 spots close to where the bag had been found, but nothing would come of this. They also found a pair of men's khaki trousers, and it is unclear if they are related to the book bag. 1 year after Aisha Degree had gone missing, Wayne Thomas, who was heading up the investigation into her disappearance, was fired. He had allegedly been withholding evidence relating to her case. He denied this and said he had been excluded from the investigation by other detectives. Dan Crawford's bid for re-election as county sheriff failed. More than 2 years after Aisha Degree had disappeared, investigators started looking into a pair of brothers who both had terrifying criminal records. Danny Ray Johnson had been charged with abducting a girl and raping her in the woods before leaving her tied to a tree. He also admitted to another attack on an 18-year-old girl days prior. His brother Herbert Johnson was also a convicted rapist and self-confessed murderer. After investigators found her bag, he was questioned. His violent track record and the fact he lived in the area at the time made him a person they wanted to talk to. He provided DNA and hair samples and said that when Aisha had gone missing, prison out of state, and he had been in a psychiatric hospital. On the 16th of September, investigators said that Herbert and Danny Ray Johnson had, for now, been ruled out. January 12, 2015. A 52-year-old man called Donald Ferguson is arrested at his home in Spartanburg, South Carolina. He's being arrested on suspicion of a horrific murder from 1990. Shalonda Paul was a 7-year-old girl who had been sexually assaulted, strangled, and stabbed 19 times before her body was dumped behind Greensboro Elementary School in North Carolina. He had previously been arrested for the sexual assault of a 10-year-old girl in Spartanburg, but posted bail while awaiting trial and moved to Greensboro where he met Shalonda. For 17 years, Shalonda's case would go unsolved. It wasn't until 2007 that it was reopened. A forensics team pored over the evidence and were able to extract DNA. It was the DNA of Donald Ferguson. In 2014, he pled guilty and was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The similarities between the cases of Shalonda and Aisha led investigators to look at him as a possible suspect, but they have not yet officially linked him to her disappearance. In 2015, the FBI joined the case to try and find out what had happened to Aisha Degree, and in February of that year, they joined forces with the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office. A new lead came in May 2016 when someone came forward to report they had possibly seen her getting into either a dark green 1970s Lincoln Continental Mark IV or possibly a Ford. In September 2017, the FBI enlisted the help of the Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team to assist in the investigation. On the 20th anniversary of her disappearance, investigators confirmed that more evidence had been found in Aisha's book bag, a copy of Dr. Seuss McGilliott's Pool, and a New Kids on the Block t-shirt. The book was from Aisha's school, Foston Elementary, and had been checked out in early 2000. They do not believe that either item was in her possession when she went missing. There are several theories as to what could have happened to Aisha Degree. One theory her parents put forward was that she could have been influenced by a book she had been reading in school. The whipping boy tells the tale of a boy whose job it is to take punishments for a prince. The pair decide to escape their trouble and run away during the night, embarking on an exciting adventure before returning to the kingdom by the end of the book. Maybe Aisha had been inspired by this tale and wanted to take part in her own adventure. They also said that the basketball game for a few days before she had gone missing had been playing on her mind. Whilst her mood had improved, she continued to talk about it, and it had obviously upset her a great deal. Maybe she had run away because she was struggling to deal with the loss of the game. Another theory is that Aisha had possibly been groomed by an adult predator posing as the girl in the photograph. Potentially she had been lured out of her home by a trusted adult under false pretenses before going to meet them. The billboard still stands where Aisha had last been seen running into the woods. It's to remind people of her and to encourage anyone with information to come forward. Every year, her family hold a walk in her memory and to ensure that her case is never forgotten. Before we proceed, I've got an exciting surprise for you. We've launched a brand new channel dedicated to intriguing content such as old historical mysteries, cold cases, and particularly chilling horror stories perfect for bedtime. Drop a comment letting us know if you're a fan of horror stories or not. You can find the link in the description below. Let's find out who will be the first to explore it. Alright, let's dive back into the video. December 31st, 2000. People from all over the globe are getting ready to ring in the new year. The first year of the new millennium has come to an end, and many are ready for new beginnings, fresh starts, and the exciting times that lie ahead. In the suburbs of western Tokyo, a woman is trying to contact her daughter, son-in-law, and grandchildren. Within just a few minutes, her world will come crashing down around her, and an investigation into one of Japan's most sinister and infamous murders will begin. Miki Miyazawa and his wife Yusuko lived in the Kamiso Shigeya neighborhood of Satagaya, Japan. He worked for a marketing company and she dedicated her life to teaching. The couple were devoted to one another and shared 2 children, Nina and Rei. Nina was a bright and clever young girl. The 8-year-old was a year ahead in school and had a passion for dance. Her grandmother Haruko said she loved ballet and would often showcase her talents to her family. Her little brother Rei was a 6-year-old with a funny and inquisitive nature. He had special needs and required extra supports, and he was adored by his family. Both children grew up surrounded by love and happiness. During the day on the 30th of December, the Miyazawa family, like many others, spent their day relaxing. They went shopping and then after eating dinner, they settled in to watch a film. Family was everything to the Miyazawas, so much so that Yasuko's mother Haruko lived in a house not far from theirs. She adored her daughter and son-in-law and doted on her grandchildren. Most mornings, Haruko would call the home to check in with her family, and on the 31st of December, this is exactly what she did. Picking up the phone and dialing the number, something strange happened. The call wouldn't go through. The phone in the Miyazawa house had been disconnected. Haruko was immediately concerned. She went to the house but got no response. As her anxiety began to rise, she let herself into the home. Lying at the bottom of the stairs was the body of her son-in-law. He had been brutally stabbed to death. She then ran upstairs where she found her daughter and granddaughter. They too had been stabbed. As she searched the rest of the house, she found her beloved grandson in his bed. He had been strangled to death. Haruko's screams were apparently so loud, those in neighboring houses heard her cries. The police soon arrived on scene after the alarm was raised. Takashi Toshida served as an officer for 41 years before his retirement. He was a chief officer at Seiho Police Station and they were in charge of the investigation. He and his colleagues were determined to get justice for the slain family. Takashi said that the scene was so traumatizing, the facial expressions of the family are still etched into his memory to this day. The news of the murders sent shockwaves throughout Japan. Murders of this nature are extremely rare and people could not believe that a family could be murdered in their own home in the most horrific way. When Makiho's mother Satsuko found out that they had been killed, she said she went into such a state of shock, she blanked out. The first thing they had to determine was a point of entry. How had the killer gained access to the house? At the back of the house stood the Sashigaya Park. This gave the perpetrators different places to enter the house from whilst remaining undetected. One theory that the police thought was most likely was that the killer had climbed a tree by the house and entered the second-floor bathroom after removing the window screen. This is still, however, just a theory. The exact point of entry remains unknown. This was further complicated when Haruko initially told investigators she had used her spare key to let herself in, but then said she wasn't sure. As the door could have been unlocked, it was hard for detectives to determine exactly how the killer had gained entry. What is known is that the events that unfolded that night are nothing short of a nightmare. After entering Rei's room, the killer strangled the 6-year-old with their bare hands. Rei's father had heard the commotion and ran upstairs to investigate. Makio fought the intruder off with all his might. He was able to injure the assailant, but the attacker was armed. Using a sashimi knife, he stabbed Mikio in the head. He stabbed him with such force that part of the blade broke off. The killer then moved through the house and attacked Yasuko and Nina with the broken blade before using a santoka knife belonging to the family to stab the mother and daughter to death. The investigators believe that the killer carried on stabbing Yasuko and Nina even after they had died. Having just wiped out the Miyazawa family in the most brutal fashion, the killer did not leave. Police estimate that they remained inside the home for between 2 and 10 hours. The intruder ate food from the fridge and drank tea. They used the family first aid kit to treat the wounds they had sustained from Mikio while attempting to fight them off. They used the family's computer to surf the internet at around 1:18 that morning within just a few hours of annihilating an entire family. The internet was also turned on at around 10 a.m. on the morning Haruko discovered the bodies. Whilst this could have been the killer, it could also have been accidentally triggered by Haruko when she entered the home. The killer also took a nap on the sofa in the second-floor living room while the bodies of the Miyazawa family were scattered throughout the house. As the investigation got underway, police were able to determine several clues about the killer's identity. Before leaving the house, the killer not only left the knives used in the murder, but also several items of clothing. Investigators determined that the items had been bought in the Kanagawa prefecture. They discovered the sweater left behind was one of only 130 ever made. It was a rare piece of clothing that only a select few had. Despite this being a major lead, it would prove to be fruitless. Despite the best efforts of the police, they were only able to find 12 of the people who had bought one of the sweaters. Another item that was left in the house was a hip bag. During the analysis, trace amounts of sand were found inside. After extensive testing, the sand was determined to have originated in the Nevada desert, more precisely the area of Edwards Air Force Base in California. Crime scene examiners scoured the house and were able to find fingerprints and DNA belonging to the killer littered throughout. When they were put through Tokyo's police database, it came back with no matches. Either they had no criminal record or they weren't a Japanese citizen. It was also revealed that the killer's blood was type A, which did not belong to the Miyazawa family. The blood revealed further clues about the murderer. It was revealed that the killer was male, possibly of mixed-race heritage. The killer's maternal DNA indicated his mother was of European descent, and his paternal DNA revealed a father of East Asian origin. The Y chromosome was scrutinized, and this showed the haplogroup OM122, common amongst people of East Asian heritage, present in 1 in 4 or 5 Koreans, 1 in 13 Japanese, and 1 in 10 Chinese people. With more evidence pointing to a possibly international killer, the Tokyo Metropolitan Police called upon the help of the International Criminal Police Organization, as the murderer could have left the country. When it came time for the funeral of the Miyazawa family, Setsuko Mikio's mother said she was so traumatized that she cannot remember it. She was so stricken with grief that she had to be carried inside. The pressure was building on investigators to provide answers for the shattered family. The police released a mock-up of what the killer had possibly looked like and the clothes he would have been wearing. He was estimated to be around 5'5" and of slim stature. They also believed he was between the ages of 15 and 35 due to the physical fitness it would have required to enter the home and commit the murders. The wounds sustained by the Miyazawa family also indicated that he was right-handed. The investigation into the Miyazawa family massacre became the center of national news, and many theories started to circulate. One theory was that Mikio had been seen arguing with youths skateboarding in the park near his home, as the clothes left the scene could indicate a skater. Maybe someone had enough of Mikio's complaints about the noise and sought revenge. It wasn't just the police who were conducting investigations. An investigative journalist named Fumiya Ichihashi covered the case extensively. He wrote a book about it, and he argued that the murderer was a former soldier from the South Korean army who became a hitman. Ichihashi has said that the family was paid compensation when the park near the house had been expanded, and this was a motive for the killer. He has also said that as the killer left behind not only clothes and the murder weapons, but also DNA and fingerprints, he would have had to have been sure he wouldn't be apprehended. He also believes that the initial investigation was not enough. All the special investigators for the Tokyo Police Department were working on different cases, so the reserve team was used instead. And due to it being New Year's Eve, many investigators were at home with their families, so valuable time could have been lost when sending officers to the crime scene. Investigator Toshida has dismissed these claims, calling it nonsense. The investigation into the murders of the Miyazawa family became one of the biggest in Japanese history. Nearly 250,000 officers were involved, and over 12,000 pieces of evidence were collected. Police scoured the local area with a fine-tooth comb. They interviewed friends and associates of the Miyazawa family to try and find a motive in this seemingly random case. But every lead would go nowhere. Despite the tireless efforts of the Tokyo Metropolitan Police, the countless hours spent investigating, and the very specific details they have been able to uncover about the killer, they have never been able to determine his identity. And he remains at large to this day. The detectives who worked on the Miyazawa case have since retired, but the investigators have never given up hope that the perpetrator of the Miyazawa family massacre would be brought to justice. As of 2019, there are 35 officers assigned to the case. There is a reward of 20 million yen for any information that could help solve the murders. Every year, the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Force make a pilgrimage to the house to renew their promise that the killer will be caught. Manobu Ide works for the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Special Investigative Task Force. He has vowed to carry on until the killer has been captured and has said that his colleagues want to help the family rest in peace by finding their murderer. The house has stood empty since that fateful day, perfectly preserved, but due to its age, the police want to have it demolished. Superintendent Ide has assured that all evidence from within the house has been preserved and tearing it down will not affect the investigation. Despite being retired, has never left the case behind. Even after his retirement, he made his own flyers to try and seek out new information, and he still visits the crime scene regularly so as not to forget the details. He remains in close contact with Mikio's mother Setsuko. Setsuko has a shrine to her son, daughter-in-law, and grandchildren in her home, and whenever Toshida visits, he always prays at the shrine, promising the family he will never give up hope that they will have justice. Setsuko has the toys her grandchildren loved in a cabinet on display. She has said that her greatest regret was that she never got to see them grow up into the amazing adults they would have been. The impact of the murders is both far-reaching and irreparable. For those who investigated, they remain unable to forget the crime scene and will not move on until the killer is caught. Setsuko has said that she longs for the day she can go to the shrine in her home and tell her son, daughter-in-law, and grandchildren that the person who took their lives in the most sadistic and brutal way possible has finally been caught. If you have any information relating to the murders of Mikio Miyazawa, Yasuko Miyazawa, Nina Miyazawa, and Rei Miyazawa, then please contact the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Force. October 10, 2016, a 999 dispatcher receives a call that everyone in the emergency services dreads. It's the request for an ambulance for a 2-year-old girl. She's not breathing and she's not responding. The call is made by her mother, 20-year-old Cody and Jackson. The police and paramedics rushed to the scene, and after breaking down the front door, they were confronted by a horrific sight. 2-year-old Macy was on the bedroom floor and her mother had been attempting CPR. What became clear was that Macy had been dead for some time before the call to 999 had been made. Her mother, Cody and Jackson, told the paramedics that her and her daughter had been co-sleeping and Macy had died during the night, and she hadn't realized until she'd woken up the next morning and found her cold body. As her daughter lay on the bedroom floor and before the ambulance was called, Jackson had made a failed suicide attempt by taking an overdose of migraine tablets as well as self-harming with 2 kitchen knives. She'd also written a suicide note which read, "There's nothing for me or Macy." It was now the task of investigators to try and piece together exactly what had happened and how Macy's life had ended. Was it an accidental tragedy or something far more sinister? They sealed off the area and set about looking more closely into Jackson and her background. Jackson had recently split with Macy's father Paul just a few days before. They had met at a house party in 2013, and whilst she had fallen pregnant within just a few months, they were delighted to be having their first child together. However, this happiness was not to last as their relationship proved toxic. Paul ended up leaving the family home as he did not want his daughter to see her parents fighting all the time. In the weeks and months leading up to Macy's death, Paul had been bombarded by abusive messages from Jackson with threats that he would never see his daughter again. Hours before Macy was found dead, Jackson sent a picture of her to Paul along with the message, "Sorry, just thought you deserved one last picture and memory of her." Both Jackson and Paul were arrested. After just 8 hours in custody, Paul was released without charge, but Jackson wasn't. An autopsy revealed that Macy had not died from sudden infant death syndrome nor accidental suffocation. The report concluded that Macy had either been smothered or had pressure applied to her neck. It was clear that it was not an accident. And with that, Cody and Jackson was charged with murder. As her trial began, she maintained that Macy's death was an accident. However, on day 5 of her trial, she sensationally changed her plea. She admitted what she had done. She had smothered Macy and then made the call to the emergency services after her daughter had died in an attempt to cover her tracks. Jackson was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 16 years. Since the death of his daughter, Paul has been trying to rebuild his life. He was offered counseling to help with his trauma, but he said the support and love of his family saw him through his darkest days. He is determined that his daughter's memory will continue to live on in the joy that she brought to so many people. In 1999, Barry Bednar and Lauren Lefebvre welcomed their son, Breck, into the world. Lauren and Barry were both originally from the United States, but had moved to the United Kingdom 3 years before he was born. Breck was warm and friendly. He was popular amongst his peers and had a wide circle of friends that loved his relaxed and funny nature. Breck's biggest passion was IT and computing. He was advanced with technology well beyond his years and would spend his free time gaming with friends online. A friend of Breck's from his church youth group introduced him to an exclusive online gaming club. His mother soon began to notice a change in his behavior. She said he started becoming more negative and withdrawn. He would refuse to go to church and retreated more into his online world. His mother was aware that he was talking to someone online and became so concerned that she limited his access to electronics and stored parental blockers on his computer, and also prohibited him from using the same server as this elusive online man. This shadowy online presence would control the gaming group and members would communicate using only their voices. No matter what his mother tried, the man would always find his way back into Breck's life. He would tell him stories that he was a millionaire who had donated millions in Bitcoin to help Syrian rebels fighting in the civil war. He told Breck that he wouldn't need to stay on in school or go to university as he would secure him a job in the computer technology industry that would earn him hundreds of thousands of pounds. Lauren became so disturbed by the power this man had over her son's life that in December of 2013 she called the police. She explained that her son was being groomed and was in serious danger, but despite this the man continued to exert his power over Breck. 2 months later, in February 2014, Breck was due to spend the weekend at his father's house. As time ticked by and Breck failed to show, Barry contacted Lauren to tell her that their son had failed to arrive. A few hours later, his younger siblings' phones began to blow up. The 12-year-old triplets were receiving messages that their brother had been murdered and that a photo of his body was circulating around social media. His death was later confirmed by the police after emergency services had tried their best to save his life. It soon became clear what had happened that fateful weekend. He had been convinced by the man he had been talking to online to go to Essex to meet him. Breck took a taxi and traveled to Roseby Road in Grays. When he arrived, he was overpowered and duct tape was used to tie his ankles and wrists. He was then repeatedly stabbed in the neck. After this, his killer called 999. This was the voice of the man who had groomed Breck over the last several months, the man who had tormented Breck's parents and had now taken their son's life. But this man was no older than a teenager. He was 18-year-old Lewis Daines, an unemployed computer engineer who was described as introverted and reclusive. When they arrived, police found encrypted electronic equipment that Daines had submerged in water in a desperate attempt to cover his tracks. They found Breck's blood-stained clothes in a plastic bag and even a number of messages that Daines had sent him detailing what he should say to his father if he asked where he was going. Lewis Daines was arrested and charged with 1 count of murder. Before a jury could be sworn in, Daines confessed. He was given a life sentence with a minimum term of 25 years, which he must serve before he can be considered for parole. Breck's family were awarded an undisclosed financial sum and an opportunity to work in the field. Breck's family were awarded an undisclosed financial sum and an opportunity to work in from Surrey Police for the way they had handled the case when Lauren had initially reported that her son was being groomed. In the aftermath of his death, his family set up the Breck Foundation. The aim of the foundation is to help children and young people be more aware of online dangers and promote responsible use of the internet. Through the work of the foundation, the memory of Breck Bednar continues to live on. As the summer of 2014 was coming to an end, a woman was walking her dog through the graveyard of St. Margaret of Antioch's Church in the East London district of Barking when she came across the lifeless body of a man. He was young, in his 20s, and propped up in the graveyard. 3 weeks later, she was walking through the same graveyard when she found another body. This too was a man, in his 20s, propped up in the same position. The young men were named as Gabriel Cavari and Daniel Whitworth. Both were gay, and despite the near-identical circumstances surrounding their deaths, the police ruled them both as non-suspicious drugs overdoses. A suicide note was found with the body of Daniel Whitworth. It explained that he and Cavari had taken drugs together and that Cavari had died of an overdose. Ridden with guilt, Whitworth had then taken his own life. In September 2015, another body was found. He was young, gay, and propped up against the wall in the same graveyard. He was named as Jack Taylor, and he too, like Gabriel Cavari and Daniel Whitworth, had died of a drugs overdose. 3 bodies in the same area, all young and all gay men. Before the bodies of Cavari, Whitworth, and Taylor were found, in June 2014 someone called 999 to report an unconscious male on Cook Street in Barking. When they arrived, the emergency services found a young man propped up against the wall. He was declared dead on scene. There were no signs of foul play, but his shirt had been pulled up as if he had been dragged in position there. His mobile phone was also missing. The young man was named as Anthony Wargate, a young fashion student studying at the University of Middlesex. The police were desperate to find the anonymous 999 caller, and they soon discovered he was a man called Stephen Port. They ran into his flatmate outside, and when the police entered 62 Cook Street, they found Port asleep in bed. He gave the police a witness statement saying that he had come home from a night shift and found an unconscious man lying in front of his door. He said he had slapped him in the face to try and wake him up, but after getting no response, he propped him against the wall and called 999. He didn't wait for the emergency services to arrive. Instead, he hung up, went inside, and fell asleep. The police found out that Anthony Walgate had been hired as an escort by Port. Anthony was cautious and had told his friends where he was going, then gave them a photo of the man he was meeting. After calling his statement into question, the police arrested him on suspicion of attempting to pervert the course of justice. They also believed that he had Anthony's missing phone. They searched his flat and seized his laptop as well as taking samples of his DNA. Anthony's friends begged the police to look further into his death. A year later, and with now 4 dead men, the Metropolitan Police Force issued a photograph of Jack Taylor with a tall blonde man that they wanted to identify. He was instantly recognized by a barking police officer as none other than Stephen Port. On the 15th of October, 2015, Port was arrested at his flat on suspicion of causing 4 deaths by use of poison. 3 days later, he was charged with murder. News of Port's arrest began to spread, and more people were coming forward to help build a picture of who this man was. He was described as introverted and childlike, a man who kept himself to himself. It also became clear that Stephen Port was a serial rapist and dangerous sex offender, with a string of instances where he had drugged and raped various men. 8 men came forward and described meeting Port online before being drugged and sexually assaulted by him. This was the same modus operandi he had used with the 4 men he had murdered. He would set up a meeting after contacting them online or on an app. He would then drug and sexually assault them before dragging their bodies out of his flat. The handwriting of the suicide note left with the body of Daniel Whitworth was analyzed, and it was determined that Daniel hadn't written the note. Stephen Port had. It was one part of the web of lies and deceit that he had strung in order to cover his tracks, including calling 999 having just murdered Anthony Wargate. Stephen Port was a serial killer. Detective Chief Inspector Tim Duffield, who led the investigation into Port, said he was one of the most dangerous men he had ever encountered. Stephen Port was given the most severe sentence possible in British criminal law, a whole life order, meaning he will never be released and he will die behind bars. The friends and family of Gabriel Cavari, Jack Taylor, Daniel Whitworth, and Anthony Wargate fought tirelessly to have the police answer their questions. How could they have 4 bodies in the same area with the same profile, all dying from the same cause, without the cases being linked? And the victims' families have also launched a civil claim against the Metropolitan Police Force. Whilst Stephen Port will die in prison, the devastation he caused is immeasurable and irreparable, and his staggering arrogance and callousness is no more apparent than in that 999 call.